I'd like to talk to everybody today about something I have begun to call the nudge imperative. And if you are so moved, please feel free to tweet about your experiences with your nudge imperative at hashtag nudge imperative, or sorry, not at, hashtag nudge imperative during or after my comments. So I want to start with a short story about me at age 19. That's me. And I know what you all are thinking. Wow, she can really draw. I'm a big fan of Sonny Brown and Dan Rome, who encourage us to doodle, so bear with me through this. But at age 19, I was a sophomore in college, and I was about 6 weeks out from having to declare my major. And for a combination of reasons, I'm the eldest, plus my personality, really hard on myself, I called home in tears. I said, I don't know what to declare, I don't know what to major in. My parents are listening. These are in the days when there was a phone in their bedroom and a phone in the kitchen. They were each on a phone. And they said, okay, well, what do you mean you don't know what to major in? I said, well, I almost failed economics, and I think poli-sci is boring, and sociology just reduces people to numbers. And they said, what are you interested in? And I said, well, kind of apologetically, I really like these Africana Studies courses I've been taking, and I really love this anthropology class that I just took this semester. And they listened, and they said, that's what you should study. And I said, what? And they said, you should study what you love, and opportunities will come to you. Now, I had in my head societal expectations, what I thought my parents expected of me. My parents had sacrificed a lot for our education. I didn't want to disappoint them. I wanted to get a good job at the end of a really wonderful and expensive education. And I wasn't quite comfortable yet, I thought, about this idea of following my heart. My parents actually gave me an incredible gift, and it was that permission to do what I love, and opportunities will come to you, that I've taken with me through the rest of my life. Now, I also realized that that encouragement to follow your heart, to follow intuition, had been with me for quite a while. This is not me. This is actually any woman of a certain age who was a bona fide bookworm and nerd knows who I'm talking about. This, of course, is Nancy Drew. And Nancy was excellent at not only following the trail of crumbs and evidence, but Nancy Drew also was very attuned to her intuition. So I realized that this lesson and this messaging had been part of my upbringing as well as what I was just interested in. This, of course, is a hipster dude. And any successful hipster dude entrepreneur, through an interview or through their biography, at some point in time will talk about, despite all of the metrics that they followed, to an entrepreneur, they will say something like, something just told me. I shouldn't do that deal with that person. I knew that was the person to work with, or I knew I should walk away. So what is it about, even in the business context, that where we still find this realm of the irrational? And that has really gotten me to think, in my professional space, much more about intuition. So Albert Einstein was a big proponent of intuition, and he actually referred to it as a sacred gift, and the rational mind as a faithful servant, and pointed out to us that we've created a society that actually honors the servant, but has forgotten the gift. Steve Jobs, a very clever fellow, has credited intuition as a very powerful thing, and he said that it had a huge impact on his work. Sophie Burnham has defined intuition as, it's a knowing without knowing. It's that ambiguity that John just spoke about that we have to get very comfortable with, that is a real and present part of being human. The US Navy, our military, has invested a lot of research dollars over the past 2 years in trying to understand and study the role of intuition in military combat. And one of my great heroes, Harriet Tubman, liberated more than 300 enslaved African Americans over the course of her time of leading people through freedom in this country, really paying attention to her dreams. And she credits her dreams with having some kind of mystical mapping of the route she should take, and she never lost a person. So the dictionary.com explains that intuition is this ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. So I kind of think of intuition as feelings that reside in the mind. It's this nice simpatico between that left brain, right brain. Maybe we could call them brain feelings. And in a lot of ways, intuition is a muscle. And the more we exercise it, the stronger it gets, and the more fluid and flexible it gets. It's also, in my view, a type of radar. And the more you pay attention to it, the sharper it gets, the clearer it gets. And the more you push it aside, the softer it becomes. So I've started applying that to my work. I'm really interested in how we can optimize creativity in the way that we work. And I understand creativity as a chaotic system. Creativity, I think, a lot of times is misunderstood as this foo-foo, frilly add-on. It actually is quite complex, and it requires both chaos and order, both randomness and structure. And randomness is not anarchy, and structure is not some sort of dominant order. And in my work, I understand the two biggest components of creativity to be improvisation and intuition. And a lot of my work earlier on, I was really interested in how can our organizations become more improvisational. And I was looking at that through the jazz music lens. And now I'm really shifting to understand this aspect of intuition, especially as we observe and learn from entrepreneurs. And the question I'm really interested in is, where do we find intuitive leadership? And by leadership, I'm really talking about emergent leadership. Not the leadership necessarily that's only at the helm and top of a hierarchy, but the leadership that resides and is embedded throughout an organization. So I call that the nudge imperative. And there's 4 aspects of the nudge imperative that I always like to highlight. The first is pattern recognition. So to really become excellent at intuition and paying attention to it really means that you become a recognizer of patterns. It also means that you are very aware when the patterns are slightly off, which is also an important signal. The other aspect of the nudge imperative is that we begin to reduce regret. In my view, regret is one of the most horrible emotions in the human existence. And so there's nothing worse than knowing what you can't quite put into words or rationalize, you don't have the data for it, but knowing you should have gone in that direction and you went in a different direction. The third aspect of the nudge imperative is the blessing of unexpected reward. Charles Kuralt, the journalist, said that the love of family and the admiration of friends is much more important than wealth and privilege. And it's been my experience that oftentimes when I followed my heart, that was the easy part. Oftentimes it was a pretty lonely path. And later I discovered there were people from afar who were cheering me on and hoping me well. The last aspect of the nudge imperative is this idea of clarity. It gives us an attunement to our surroundings and a real distillation of what we should do. So I also have to ask, is following your intuition a luxury? Because after all, my flagging myself, what am I going to major in college, it's a first world problem, right? It's not exactly going to solve a lot of the critical issues that our world is dealing with. So is following your intuition a luxury, or is following your intuition actually a primal strategic tool for survival? And I think it's the latter. And in the business space, there are more and more researchers who actually are aligned with this thinking. So William Dugan is a business professor at Columbia Business School, and he highlights 3 types of intuition. Ordinary intuition is that intuition that is just that gut feeling. I shouldn't go down that alley. I should marry this person. I need to break up with this person. That's ordinary, gut-wrenching intuition. Expert intuition is that intuition that comes from having honed a craft, and without knowing what's behind the corner, you know exactly where to move. So LeBron James, for example, is someone who's excellent expert in intuition, although my husband pointed out to me that lately in the last game, maybe he was not so much. Strategic intuition is that intuition that's really interesting. It's slow, it's clear, and it comes to us in contexts that are very new. And that becomes really important in these ambiguous landscapes. Now here's the challenge. In a world where we're more saturated with data and information and nudging of a different kind, how do we make out that clarity? So this is a slide that points out that just within 1 year, from between 2014 to 2015, while the total population only increased 1.6%, our use of active social media accounts increased 12%, and active mobile social media accounts, in other words, always on our hip, always in our hands, increased 23%. This slide points out that it was only 10 years ago that we tipped the scale, and all of a sudden, there were more connected devices than human beings roaming about. And what's interesting is that as of this year, in 2015, the number of devices, the number of people versus connected devices is at a multiplier of 3x. So the estimated population is at 7 billion, the number of connected devices we have is at 25 billion. So we've got Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and Pinterest and YouTube and the phone and Google and Twitter, and my 14-year-old stepdaughter pointed out to us recently that Twitter is for older people, and by old people, she meant 20-somethings. Of her generation is focused on Instagram, Skype, and Snapchat. So we have this saturation constantly of clutter and of details. When one of the things we do realize about intuition is that we need space and stillness to get to that clarity. So what do you do in the absence of clues? What do you do in ambiguous situations, in the absence of data? And one of the things I try to do along our faculty in the Strategic Design MBA program at Philadelphia University is to get our graduate students really comfortable with navigating ambiguity. And it's challenging. What do you do in VUCA environments? This is a term that comes from our US military, environments that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So, like any self-respecting professor of strategic design, I created a 2x2. So if we were to plot tuning into your intuition over time, this is a really disastrous and hazardous way to go. That if over time you're attuned to your intuition less and less, that's probably not going to end very well. What's more hopeful and mindful is that at different inflection points, you do self-correct and realize that there are points in time when you really need to start paying attention to your intuition. And the nudge imperative allows us to self-correct. And if I were to plot low intuition versus high intuition and really focusing on the rationale versus not so focused on the rationale, this guy in the lower left-hand quadrant, residing in that space is almost monstrous. Residing in the space where you have high heart, high intuition, but your cognitive skills are not quite there, that's in the realm of children. And then what we actually realize is that one of what Western civilization has focused on and made dominant is logic, is rationale. And any proponents of sociology had to read William White's The Organization Man, and that certainly also emphasized that. In this upper right-hand corner are those heroes of mine who were able to integrate heart and mind. So I would add to that, in addition to Harriet Tubman and Steve Jobs and Albert Einstein, Twyla Tharp, and LeBron James. So what happens when following your heart isn't the path of least resistance? Because actually, in a lot of ways, the easy part is deciding, okay, I'm going to practice more listening to that gut. I don't have any explanation for why, but I'm going to try to follow this. You actually will realize that's the easy part. The hard part is that it's actually a very solo ride. Because oftentimes, there's not anyone else who's going to be residing with you. So where do you get the stamina and the endurance to follow that path? Well, I call this cultivating your intuitive core. What are the causes of really prompting more intuition? We need stillness. We need to be better observers. We need to lean in and be much more curious, and we have to become active listeners. In a lot of ways, these are the things that are all part of empathy and having an empathic stance. The effects are discernment, acting on your principles, speaking up, and stamina. So at the core, if we have kind of this intuitive meta stance as we live our lives, is this stillness and observation and curiosity. Outward of that is discernment, acting on principles, and speaking up. And that ultimately leads to people who are these creative, innovative, strategic geniuses. And this is the core that I hope we cultivate in young people today. These are the elements that I think are highly important to encourage them to clear out the clutter and to be able to follow their heart. And certainly, Harriet Tubman, maybe Albert Einstein and Steve Jobs consider themselves creative geniuses, but often those people who we look at afar who are doing this type of living are not necessarily calling themselves that, but in my view, it is genius. So what I've learned since over 25 years ago of my parents giving me the gift to follow my heart, to do what I love, and to trust that opportunities will come is that they were right. And I encourage all of you to also embrace your nudge imperative. Thank you.